Snow clawed at the empty train platform, wind howling like a wounded animal. The lights flickered, weak and cold, over frozen tracks that led nowhere. Keisha pulled her torn coat tighter, her breath turning to mist. The last train had been canceled hours ago, and everyone else had already gone home. Everyone except her. Then she saw him, a man slumped across a bench, still as a statue, Snow bearing his suit jacket. At first, she thought he was drunk, but when she brushed the frost from his face, her stomach dropped. His lips were blue, his skin ice cold. "Sir, hey, can you hear me?" No response, only the wind answering with a low scream. Her nurse instincts kicked in, 2 fingers to his neck. Faint pulse. Barely there. She looked around the deserted station. No help, no signal on her phone. Nothing but snow and silence. "Lord, don't you die on me," she whispered, voice trembling. Keisha grabbed his arm, tried to lift him. He was heavy, too heavy for her small frame, but she didn't stop. Step by step, she dragged him off the platform, boots slipping on ice, every breath cutting like glass. Snowflakes stung her face, but she kept going. Her cabin was half a mile through the woods, a distance that now felt like a lifetime. Each step was a prayer. "Please, God, let me make it." When her legs gave out, she forced herself back up. When her hands bled through the gloves, she ignored the pain. She didn't know his name, didn't know his story, but she knew what it felt like to be left behind. And she refused to let that happen tonight. By the time she reached her door, she could barely stand. She shoved it open, dragged him inside, and fell to her knees beside the dying fire. Her fingers fumbled with the matches. 1 strike, 2, flame at last. Warmth filled the cabin, trembling and small, but enough. She turned to him, breathless, whispering, "You're safe now. You hear me? You're safe." If this already made your blood boil, hit like and subscribe right now, because stories like this are still happening, and the world needs to hear them. The fire crackled low, throwing thin orange light across the cabin walls. Keisha crouched beside the man she had just saved, wrapping him in every blanket she owned, a patched quilt from her mother, an old fleece, even her winter coat. His face looked pale under the flicker. Features sharp, lips trembling as life slowly crawled back. "Come on, don't quit now," she whispered, rubbing his hands to pull warmth through his veins. "You didn't freeze out there just to die in here." Steam from a boiling pot filled the air with the smell of ginger and with smoke. Keisha's body ached from dragging him, her shoulders raw, her legs shaking, but she didn't rest. She poured a small cup of hot water, leaned close, and tilted it gently toward his lips. He swallowed, weak but real. She exhaled, eyes glistening. "Good. That's right. You fight, mister. You fight." For the first time, she noticed his clothes, a tailored suit, silk tie, cufflinks engraved with initials. Whoever he was, he didn't belong out here in the snow. But she didn't ask questions. Not yet. She sat back against the wall, chest heaving, exhaustion pressing down heavy. Outside, the wind screamed, rattling the window panes. The storm was still hungry. She glanced toward the photograph nailed above the fireplace. Her mother's smiling face, faded and warm. "Mama, you'd tell me I'm crazy," she murmured, bringing home a strange white man in the middle of a blizzard. A small laugh escaped her, tired but real. Then she turned serious again, watching the man stir faintly. His name slipped from a wallet she'd found in his coat pocket. Ethan Walker. A fancy name for someone nearly frozen to death. He groaned softly, eyes twitching beneath closed lids. "Claire," he whispered. Keisha froze. That name again. Whoever Claire was, he said it like a prayer, and a wound all at once. She adjusted the blankets. Voice low. "Rest, Ethan. Whoever she is, she can wait till you wake up." The fire popped, sending sparks like tiny stars into the air. Keisha leaned her head against a wooden wall, eyelids heavy, heart still racing from what she'd done. The cabin was quiet now, only the soft rhythm of two people breathing against a world gone white. Morning light crept through the frosted window, soft and silver. The storm had finally eased, but the world outside still looked buried, quiet, endless, and cruelly white. Keisha stirred first, her back sore, hands stiff from the night's fight. She checked the man on the floor, the billionaire whose name she now knew, Ethan Walker. His breathing was steady, skin no longer icy. Relief loosened her chest. She added a log to the fire, and the sound made him stir. His eyes opened slowly, unfocused, blinking against the light. "Where am I?" he rasped. "You're safe?" Keisha said, keeping her tone calm. "You passed out at the station. I found you half frozen." He tried to sit up, but fell back with a wince. "You dragged me here?" "Half a mile in a blizzard," she replied, stirring the pot of broth. "You're lucky I'm stubborn." He stared at her, really looked at her now. Her skin, her braids, the worn clothes, the calm authority in her voice. He blinked, ashamed. "I don't even know how to thank you." "Don't need thanks," she said. "Just drink this." She handed him the mug. He hesitated, then drank slowly. The warmth hit him, and for the first time in hours, his hands stopped shaking. "What's your name?" he asked. "Keisha Williams." His brows lifted. "You live out here alone?" "After the world I've seen, peace ain't a bad thing." She didn't plan to say more, but something in his tone, the disbelief, lit a spark. "I used to be a nurse," she said. "Downtown Atlanta. Loved my job. Helped people. Until I reported my supervisor for stealing medical funds meant for low-income families." Ethan listened, frowning. "They said I was lying. Angry. You know that word, the one they use when a black woman stops smiling. They fired me, blacklisted me. Couldn't find work anywhere." Her voice didn't shake. She told the story too many times in her own head to cry anymore. "So I came out here. Figured the mountains don't care what color I am." Ethan lowered his eyes, guilt creeping across his face. "I'm sorry," he whispered. She shrugged. "Don't be. I didn't pull you from that snow to start counting sins. You're alive. That's enough." The silence that followed wasn't awkward. It was heavy, the kind that builds bridges between two people who've both been broken. If this happened right in front of you, what would you do? Tell me in the comments. I read every one. And if you want justice as much as I do, hit subscribe. The blizzard had slowed to a whisper, sunlight breaking weakly through the gray. Ethan sat propped against the wall, still pale but stronger. Keisha stood near the stove, stirring broth. The smell of wood smoke and ginger filled the air, the scent of survival. "I don't know how to repay you," he said quietly. "If you hadn't found me, you'd be part of the scenery by now," she interrupted softly, not unkindly. "I wasn't about to let that happen." Ethan managed a faint smile. "You talk like you've done this before." "I've saved plenty of people," she said, "but most of them did wear watches worth more than my car." Her words landed sharp but honest. For a second, he had no comeback. He just stared at her, a woman who had every reason to walk away, yet didn't. "I wasn't always as helpless," he murmured, staring into the fire. "I used to run one of the biggest investment firms in New York. Thought I had it all figured out. Power, control, money. Then my wife got sick. Cancer. I tried to buy her more time." He stopped, voice cracking. "But money can't bargain with death." Keisha leaned against the table, her gaze steady. "Money can't buy peace either." He looked up, surprised. "You sound like someone who's lost a lot." "I have," she said simply. "But I still get to wake up and fight again. That's the difference." Their eyes met. Two people from different worlds suddenly standing on the same ground. The silence between them turned soft, human. Then a sound shattered it. 3 dull thuds against the door. Knock, knock, knock. Keisha's body went still. Ethan straightened, pain forgotten. Another knock, louder this time. "No one should be out here," she whispered. "Not after that storm." Ethan's jaw tightened. "Maybe it's help." She shook her head, stepping toward the window, poker in hand. Through the frost, she saw only white, a blur of snow, shadow, and movement. The knock stopped. The silence that followed was heavier than the storm itself. Keisha turned back to Ethan, eyes cold. "Who else knows you're alive?" He swallowed hard. "No one, I think." The door creaked open slowly. A man stood outside, wrapped in a dark coat dusted with snow, his face pale from the cold, but his smile too controlled to be innocent. "Ethan Walker," he said, his voice steady. "I'll be damned. You're alive." Ethan froze. His breath hitched. "Derek." The man nodded, stepping into the warm glow of the cabin without waiting for an invitation. He brushed the snow from his sleeves and looked around. "Nice place. Didn't expect to find you hiding in the woods." Keisha stayed near the corner, poker in hand, eyes sharp. "You know him?" Ethan's voice was tight. "Used to. My business partner." "Used to." Derek chuckled. "Come on, Ethan. We built half of Manhattan together. You disappeared for days, and now the whole board thinks you're dead. Had to see for myself." He turned to Keisha, his gaze lingering too long. "And you are—" "Someone who kept him alive," she replied flatly. "Ah," Derek said, smirking. "Well, then I owe you thanks. Truly." But his tone wasn't gratitude. It was condescension wrapped in charm. Keisha felt it instantly, that quiet sting she knew too well. Ethan shifted uneasily. "Why are you here, Derek?" "I could ask you the same," Derek replied, circling the small room. "You vanish right before an audit, leave the company scrambling. You think people wouldn't notice?" Ethan frowned. "Audit? What audit?" Derek's smile didn't falter. "Don't act surprised. The press is already circling. Investors are panicking. Trent's trying to convince everyone to sell off your divisions. Trent doesn't have that authority." "He does now," Derek said casually. "You left no instructions. No contact. You made it easy for vultures to move in." Keisha stepped forward, breaking the tension. "So you drove through a snowstorm just to deliver bad news?" Derek looked at her again, smirk returning. "I like to handle my investments personally." Ethan's expression hardened. "You're not here for me. You're here for something else." Derek's smile faded just a little. "Maybe I wanted to make sure your disappearance was permanent." Keisha's grip tightened on the poker. The air in the cabin turned electric. Outside, the wind howled again, the storm reclaiming its voice. Derek paced near the fireplace, the heat licking across his smirk. "So this is how the mighty Ethan Walker ends up," he said. "Half dead in a stranger's cabin, rescued by a woman the world wouldn't even look at twice." Keisha's jaw tightened, but her voice stayed calm. "Say that again," she said quietly. Derek chuckled. "Didn't mean any offense, sweetheart." Ethan rose slowly from the chair, pain flaring through his ribs. "You should leave." "I will," Derek said, "once I get what I came for." He turned toward Ethan, eyes sharp. "The Meridian files. Don't play dumb. The encrypted data tied to the charity fund. You think I don't know what you were doing before you vanished?" Ethan froze. Keisha frowned. "What is he talking about?" Ethan's voice dropped. "He's talking about stolen donations. We built a foundation for underprivileged families. Derek turned it into a shell company. Millions meant for schools and shelters went into offshore accounts." Derek's smirk returned. "You can't prove any of that." "Oh, I can," Ethan said. "And you came here to make sure I never would." For the first time, Derek's composure cracked. His hand twitched toward his coat. Keisha's eyes caught it instantly. "Don't even think about it," she said, stepping between them, the iron poker raised. "Easy," Derek warned, palms up. "I'm just lying," she cut in. "You drove through a blizzard for money, not friendship." Ethan limped forward, voice steady. "You're done, Derek. When this storm clears, I'm going public with everything." "You won't live that long," Derek hissed. Keisha moved faster than he expected, swinging the poker into the table beside him, the crash echoing through the cabin like thunder. "Try me," she said, eyes blazing. Derek flinched, backing toward the door. His arrogance cracked into fear. "This isn't over," he spat, then vanished into the snow, the door slamming behind him. Silence swallowed the room. Only the fire hissed, slow and dangerous. Ethan slumped back into the chair, trembling. "You just saved my life again." Keisha leaned on the poker, breathing hard. "Seems like a pattern." He gave a small, exhausted laugh. I owe you everything. She shook her head. No, Ethan, just make it mean something. Morning came soft and silver. The storm had finally spent itself, leaving the mountains wrapped in quiet peace. The world outside glittered with fresh snow, untouched, reborn. Keisha stood by the window, the fire behind her now just warm embers. Ethan sat nearby, fully dressed, bruised but alive. He looked out too, silent for a long time. You ever seen something so still? He asked. Only after the worst storms, she said. That's when the world finally breathes again. He nodded slowly, then turned to face her. I meant what I said last night. I'm going to expose everything. The stolen money, the fraud, all of it. And when I do, I'm rebuilding that foundation. For real this time. I want you to run it. Keisha blinked. You want me to run it? You've got the heart for it, he said softly, and the strength I never had. She crossed her arms, a faint smile tugging her lips. I don't take charity. It's not charity, Ethan replied. It's partnership. A beat of silence passed. The fire cracked softly. Outside, the wind moved through the trees like a whisper of something holy. Keisha finally nodded. All right, partner. But we do it my way. People first, headlines last. Ethan smiled. Deal. She moved toward the table, picking up the mug she'd been drinking from since the first night. Same cracked handle, same chipped rim. Funny, she said. I saved you thinking it was just about keeping someone alive. Turns out it was about saving something bigger. He met her eyes. You did save something bigger. You reminded me what life's supposed to mean. For a long moment, neither spoke. Just two survivors sharing the same quiet air. The same lesson. Storms don't destroy everyone. Some people are built from them. Keisha stepped outside, the cold air biting her cheeks. Sunlight breaking through the clouds. She looked up at the sky and whispered, Mama, I made it. Behind her, the cabin door closed softly. A new chapter had begun. If you believe this should never happen again, share this now. And to my USA, UK, and Canadian viewers, your voice is power. Use it.